the Leave-It-Alone Renovation. We'll be showing you in just a second a 1907 farmhouse that's in the Hamptons where the owner did just that. Marc Myers, he's in Los Angeles. He's one of our real estate contributors who writes for the mansion section to join us right now. Now, Marc, before we get to the house itself, tell us a little bit about the owner of the house.
Morning, Wendy. The owner of the house is the great Richard Meier. Richard Meier, for those who are unfamiliar with architecture, is probably the Paul McCartney of architecture today. He is, I guess his most famous structure, Wendy, would be the Getty Center in Los Angeles, the great museum on the hill of the canyon. But what Richard did is he acquired this farmhouse, but since he's known for white and glass residences, what's interesting is he actually removed white paint from this 1907 mansion, this 1907 farmhouse.
So basically,
took the white paint off,
going against everything you would think that he would be doing. Now, this house, roughly how big is it? And then let's get down to the nitty gritty of what he did, and more importantly, what he didn't do to this house. Give us a feel for the size of the structure.
It's a 2,500-foot farmhouse built in 1907 that he acquired. It's on 20 acres, which is massive. The acreage around him was actually donated to the Nature Conservancy, so nothing can be built there. And all he did is remove the white paint from the outside, which is obviously contrary to his whole vision for architecture, residential architecture in general. And he just, when he saw the cedar shingles on the outside, he just had them sealed. So it's almost as though it's in its original state. He only painted the interior entirely white to provide as much light on the inside as possible.
Let's talk about the why he left it alone part of this, Marc, because you always hear when architects buy a structure, I mean, it's got to be really hard for them, I would imagine, not to want to put their own imprint on something, right? I mean, this is what they do. So what do you think, from having spoken to him, what drove him to really say, hey, you know what, I'm just not going to touch it that much?
I think modern architects, we always assume they're these Jetson-like characters who live in the future and are, want a complete sterile environment. But in effect, they're really quite sensitive, heartfelt folks who, for their own thinking space, want something original. They want a sense of history. And what this farmhouse provides Richard with is this sense of history, but it also gives him enormous privacy. I mean, this farmhouse, if it was in the middle of a city, would be intolerable for him. He needs quiet and he needs tranquility. And the fact that this is sitting in this sea of field gives him that quiet.
I wonder if there's also something too, though, Marc, to the backstory of how he got this house, because he knew the prior owners and in fact had sort of courted them for many years about obtaining this house. And I think sometimes when you have a relationship with prior existing owners to a home, it becomes a little bit tougher to undo what they did and what they loved for so long.
That's true, Wendy. He actually was renting a barn on the corner of this massive amount of acreage, and he went to see the owner when he started to see people stroll the land with maps, because Richard was afraid that they were going to start developing the property right next to this barn he was renting. And he went to see this couple, and the couple they were in their early 90s, and they didn't want to sell. I mean, they just didn't want to sell anything, but they promised him that when they passed away, that their son would contact him and he could make a best offer. So Richard just sat tight. He basically just left things alone. And once the couple had passed many years later, maybe 10 years later, 8 to 10 years later, he was given a call and he made the best bid and he acquired the home. So patience is a virtue here.
One thing he did, let's talk a little bit more about that very briefly, in terms of bringing the home, the inside, merging it more with the outside. That was one thing that was very important to him. Can you sort of walk us through a little more of what he did there?
Richard's thinking in terms of architecture, what's very important to him, in addition to landscape, is that the exterior and the interior not be broken, that there be a continuum from the outside straight into the inside and then back to the outside. And when he acquired this farmhouse, it had about 5 steps up to the front door. So the entire house was elevated. And what Richard did is he had all of the lands, he had the land rise up underneath the house on a slope. So there's no more steps, and you can just basically walk out a door and walk right onto lawn and down the hill, and there's a continuum.
All right, sounds like he really did leave it alone, except for a few key things. Marc, thanks so much for that.